So, to kick us off officially, really pleased to be with you today. My name is Jayna Patel and I'm from the Premier League Charitable Fund. I'm a newbie to this type of role, so please treat me with kindness and compassion. But I think our panellists, leave the hard questions up for them. Hopefully I'll do as least talking as possible and you'll hear from these brilliant people next to me on my left. But also we will come out to yourselves to get some questions, so please do keep hold of them, challenge them, put them on the spot, that's what they're here for. But absolutely do take as much as you can from the session. We'll get started. So we're here today talking about allyship and using your power for good. Many of you in the room have already been speaking about this already this morning, and just off the back of Claire's panel as well, there's a lot of talk about male allyship, which we will touch on, but also just having those good intentions and turning that into action. How do we do that? Where do we start? And so I'm hoping today we can share some of that advice with those in the room. But to kick us off, I want to get our panellists to say a quick hello to the room, and I know you've been reading up on their bios and some of them need no introduction, but I will ask each of our panellists, start with yourself Dave, to just say hello to the audience we've got in the room. 3 words to describe yourself. So 3 is the clinical number here. We're on a tight time schedule. 3 words to describe yourself, but also I'd like to know specifically what allyship means to you.
Well, first and foremost, thank you everybody. My name's David McArdle. I'm the head of ED&I with the EFL. Probably 3 words that would describe myself as passionate, curious and Scottish.
Fair.
I think that probably gives a number of other things that then describes the personality of somebody from Scotland. And allyship, I think allyship can be sounded like fairly complicated. Where I grew up, in the west of Scotland, we were told and brought up, have manners that your granny would appreciate. And what that means is, be kind. If you went to your gran, what would she expect you to act with her? Your P's and Q's and your thank yous. For me, that's what allyship is. It's being respectful, it's being understanding, it's being kind. All the things that my granny would put ahead of anything else if she wanted me to be the person who I am today. And I think when you look at that, if we can just all take that part, allyship doesn't have to be complicated. You just think about others, you consider others, and you just be kind. So if you feel you're sitting in a room and somebody's not getting the chance to have an input, or somebody's standing on the outside of a conversation, being kind, being respectful, being thoughtful, you bring them in to that conversation. That's what allyship is to me, and it's as basic as that kind of what my gran taught me when she was here. So I think that for me is just as basic as you can go.
Brilliant, thanks Dave. Chris.
Hi everyone, my name's Chris Paouros. I'm a strategy, leadership, culture and EDI consultant. In football I've got various roles. I run the official Tottenham Hotspur LGBTQ plus fan group. I'm also a trustee of Kick It Out, work closely with Troy, so it's always lovely to be sitting next to him. And I'm on the board of the Football Supporters Association, and I'm on the FA's Inclusion Advisory Board too. 3 words. Thanks for that, Jayna.
Okay.
I'm gonna go slightly differently to Dave, and I'm gonna say advocate, activist, and agitator. And I'm going to begin my agitation by saying that I'm not actually a huge fan of the term ally. Right? I think the minute you describe yourself as an ally, you're sunk. Because what you're doing is you're centering yourself, my ally identity, rather than it's like a constant act of solidarity. Are you a collaborator, a co-conspirator, a confidant? And that's where I think, and an allyship is an act, and it's a single act in that moment. And it doesn't make you an ally forever. The next time you do something, then you are, you're taking an act of allyship. And rather than, if you think about identity versus solidarity, rather than going, have I listened enough, right? This is what you hear when you see tips of allyship, make sure you listen. No, what have I heard and what can I do about it? right? And that's constant for all of us. And the other thing that irritates me slightly about it is, you know...
We could be here quite a while, by the way.
It's my last point, Troy, it's my last point. Is I don't want anyone to save me. So I understand this concept of male allies, and we've been talking about it a little bit. And it's good that there are men out there that want to make acts of solidarity and be co-conspirators and make change. But I don't want anyone to save me. And in the same way that it's not up to me to save my black and brown colleagues, but we can work together to make things better. So that's my opening there.
And
Troy, over to you, Troy.
Yeah, over to me. Shall I speak before she cuts in?
Please do, Troy, quickly.
By the way, two amazing people. I really don't know how to follow it, to be totally honest. I've had about 9 words in my head, and then I've eliminated all of them. So, my name's Troy Townsend. I'm the head of player engagement at Kick It Out. Kick It Out, obviously, a charity that works in this space. My work is around players, as my title says. And unfortunately, over the last few years, that work has increased massively, regardless of whether the players are in the academy system, whether they're, trying to earn a pro deal, or whether they are in the pro game. I'm very blessed. I feel very blessed. I've just nicked one of my 3 words. I'm very blessed for the work that I do and the connect and contacts that I have. My 3 words are unapologetic. Stay with me. Challenger, and a creative. Why am I unapologetic? Because I've lived the journey of, I'm not going to tell you the years, because you'll then start to work out my age. I don't need to work out my age. Just because I feel that maybe I should have put authentic, but authenticity is so massive in our game. Being authentic, being real you. Some of you are still finding your way, your pathway, your journey. And sometimes you may have to hide that authenticity a little bit to get to where you want to be. I've always kind of been the person that you're either going to take me for who I am or you're not. And if you like me and I can progress on the ladder because of who I am and what I talk about and the people that I talk on behalf of, then that's amazing. Football can be a very, very open space, and then football can be a little bit of a closed space. I've lived the closed part. I'm hoping that I'm living the more open part, and in that I can be such a supportive individual. When Chris spoke so passionately about ally, I just wanted to change my words because I thought she was going to have a go at me. So I see allies, but I really get and understand what Chris was saying. I always say that I've got friends in this environment, and I've created friends because of maybe who I am and the receptive nature that I am for everyone that works in this industry. A lot of those friends have come from women, from being supportive to me, from reaching out to me, from challenging me, from, just being colleagues, etc. I've just had a great conversation with somebody who I won't name, but they're sitting right in front and they're just a little bit over to this side here. Just about what she thinks of me and where she speaks about. And I didn't say it to her at the time, but I'm a little bit blown away by that. And I suppose if we remain authentic in this industry will embrace you. If you continue to be authentic and allow yourself to grow as you, as a human being, never lose your identity, never lose your name, never lose who you are. It's part of what's going to help change this environment and this industry for the better. So we've come a long way, and we have come a long way, but we take big strides, then we take small steps. But make sure that your name is imprinted on those steps all the time that you are here. Hopefully I don't get any hard questions today, but that's the introduction from me.
Thank you, Troy and Chris and Dave. And I think, that if we could define allyship, or the word ally, the combination almost of what you've brought to surface there really starts to spring into other ideas of what it could mean for you probably sitting listening in, and what it could mean for the future generations as well, actually, because I think it's an evolving term. It's not a stationary one. It has to move with the world and with the times, and I think we can see that through the history of football in particular, but I guess society as well. So Dave, I want to come to you as head of EDI at the EFL and kind of ask a little bit more around what is the work of the clubs that you're engaging with around allyship doing, and have you seen any areas of key support that clubs are looking out for and reaching out to learn more about?
We launched a strategy last year, and a big part of that was that we wanted the EFL and our clubs to be representative and reflective of the demographics in which they serve at all levels of the game. Now that means across the whole of society and a whole of that, because we understand that parts of the country are different. They've got different makeups of their demographic. They've got different reasons to do certain things. They've got different aspects to look over, and we wanted to really allow clubs to have that freedom to do that. Now that strategy is called Together, and we called it Together for one reason, is because we don't put one form of the community above another. We want everybody to be part of the game that we all love. We're all in this game for a reason. We all pay the football tax in terms of what our salary potential could be, because we want to stay in the game, and that's something that we need to build on. It's something we should be imprinting on. So when you look at some of our clubs and what they do, we've got people like at Huddersfield who've done women empowerment courses. We've done Burnley who've looked at their demographic of their staff and created a work experience programme of Hive. We've got Her Game 2 days happening all the time. We had 100% of EFL Championship clubs acknowledging and doing work around level playing fields, Unite for Access. 72 clubs, but I think the stat was it's like 90% of the population in England are 10 miles away from an EFL stadium. We are the heart of communities, and that becomes really important that we try and evolve our communities using football as that tool. So that becomes really important for us, and how we can really use that allyship and how we can use our voice in the game. And what we've seen from clubs is they want to get better. They want to have greater understanding, knowledge and awareness. So when we launched the strategy, we said we're going to educate 1,000 collective hours at our EFL clubs and each season, trying to get 5,000 collective hours over the course of the strategy. We've hit 4,000 this season already in terms of collective hours, and that's our clubs wanting and being curious about trying to be better. How can they be better advocates? How can they represent their community? Because we know the game isn't diverse at this moment in time. We look at boardrooms, it's not diverse. We look at stadiums, it's not diverse. We look at staff base, it's not diverse. We have the stats to tell us that. But one of the things I always say to my club is, yes, that will take time, but what can you do now? What you can do now is go and learn. So when you're making decisions about the club, you're making decisions what's foot forward, you might not have that lived experience, but you've got knowledge, awareness and understanding that helps you make decisions moving forward, lets you create connections where you can go and talk to people. And I challenge our boards is, if you're an all-white male board and you're making a decision about the club, what women did you speak to? Who did you go and ask a question to say, is this what we should be doing? Because me, I would class myself, well, let's put it this way, I'm white, I'm straight, I'm 35, I've lived in the UK all my life. I'm probably what would be classed as the problem in football. I am as undiverse as you can be. But
You're Scottish.
I'm Scottish, yeah. When I'm down here, I throw the Scottish card. But that, I need to continuously ask questions, and that's why I said I'm curious, because I ask questions to find out, well, what is the problem? Grew up with 2 older sisters. I've been married for 13 years. Not got a clue what it's like to be a woman. Never will. Never understand it. Never understand my wife going into the shipyards where she works for BAE Systems and work out the challenges that she faces in that day-to-day life in a male-dominated environment. I'll never understand it. I come here, I've said to a few people today, I come here and I feel awkward, I feel uncomfortable being in an environment like this because there's a handful of men. But that is what a woman in the football industry feels every single day. So it's important for me to feel uncomfortable like this. And that's where it becomes really important for me to reset myself, to understand this is why we do it, this is what we need to do. So I think that's what we try and embed into our clubs, and using our strategy, using our focus and our vision and our mission is really trying to emphasise what we mean by it.
And I think that's, really impactful and powerful when you're cultivating a network, especially as you said there, the reach and the breadth of football clubs up and down the country, whether it be in League One, League Two, non-league, National League, whatever it is, grassroots clubs, there is a connection there. And I think the fact that there's yourself and others in the team at EFL looking to push that and imprint that and embed that in community is critical. But Chris, I want to come to you with this next question, because we've spoken and heard Dave talk about networks, and it's important that this network here, and the reason why we're all here today in this forum is building and, I guess, moving to the next levels and the stages to make change and to see positive outcomes. But individually, Chris, there's things that we can do on our own accord, isn't there? And I want to ask yourself, Chris, your reflections on what are some of the qualities you would look out for in somebody who you would class as an ally / non-ally, as the term that you don't yet decide on.
Let's go with collaborator and co-conspirator.
Okay,
or
let's
something.
go with that. The two
know.
C's.
I mean, I think that's the other thing, is like, it's being a noun, I think, is the problem. It's like, because again, it immediately becomes part of your identity. But anyway, I won't bang on about that. I think it's interesting, because I think obviously there are, you know, from an individual perspective, there are obviously individual things that we can look at and do, which I'll come to in a second. But I think the other important thing is that, like, you know, you have to look at your there's systemic things here that we have to unpick, and individuals can't do that. So David just sort of saying he feels that discomfort here. You know, I'd be interested to say, okay, so you're talking about the lack of diversity in boardrooms, for example. How much discomfort do those people feel, right? So if I was in that boardroom now, I'd say, okay. So if you're serious about this, you have to be deliberate. You have to be deliberate in your intent and deliberate in your action. And that deliberate action can be things like educate yourself. I would love to know how many people in boardrooms in English football have ever read Bell Hooks, or if anyone here has read Bell Hooks, I really recommend it, right? So, like, properly educate yourself. And actually, you don't necessarily have to go and read books. There's going to be a million things you can watch on TikTok even, right? Like 3-minute things if you haven't got a long enough attention span.
Are you on TikTok?
Yeah.
Are you really?
Yeah, but I don't publish anything because I'm not 15. But I do watch TikTok, yeah, absolutely. Mostly people cooking and dancing.
Yeah.
And a little bit of, like, some of this political stuff. So, yeah, TikTok.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah. Every day's a school day, Troy. So, yeah, educate. Like, I think there's something about educating yourself. There's some good stuff around standing up and speaking up. So see something, say something. And there isn't enough of that around. And I think we empower each other when we do that. Because that first person that does that, then other people go, okay, that's okay. And we're talking about any context here. We're talking about in football stadia as well. I'm a football fan. And, you know, I can't tell you what a huge difference it makes. You know, if somebody, was sat in the same seat at White Hart Lane for 25 years, right? And all the geezers, and they were geezers, and round me, knew perfectly well that I wasn't up for any misogyny, and I wasn't up for any homophobia. I certainly wasn't up for any racism, etc. Occasionally, someone's mate would come and take the season ticket for the game, say something homophobic. I didn't have to say anything. The bloke behind me would go, ooh, don't want to say that, son. She'll have you. And that's fine. That's good enough for me. But see something, say something. Educate yourself. And actually, if you are chairing a meeting, for example, or you're a leader in an organisation, like you said, bring people in. If I'm in a meeting and there's one person of colour and 7 other people, and the person of colour hasn't said anything, I'm going to ask, what do you think? And actually, that's the thing about being deliberate about stuff. So there's all sorts of things like that on a very individual level that you can do. But then I think there are bigger sort of systemic things that we can think about as well. So I think if we're thinking about from a leadership perspective, if we're talking about sort of women's inclusion, if you like, in the workplace in football. They were talking about it in the panel earlier. It's like you can't underestimate the importance of good childcare practices, good parental leave policies. They talked about menopause policies. All of those things that actually mean that you're immediately saying this is a place where we value all of our workforce and we've thought about and are deliberate about who works for us.
Can I move? Can I move chairs? It's so hard to follow her.
We're going to be
got a different question, though.
today.
Have I? Okay.
What a different question.
No, thank you, Chris. And I think some of those individual takeaways, we can all certainly think about, especially I think the deliberate element of that. If we're going to go out and do something, if we're going to go out and put our hands in the air, let's put it up straight, strong. Let's not give it a little and be kind of dabbling around in that. Let's be direct and strong about that. And I think certainly your messaging gives that from an individual point of view, but certainly, Dave, in your positions and those of you in the room who sit in positions where you are influencing networks, whether that be young people, whether that be people in different teams, single-sex teams, whether it be networks in football or outside of football, in sport as a collective, it's important that you take that control and I guess include more when you have the ability to influence in that way. Troy, of course, you're a very influential person, and the work that you've done in Kick It Out and over the many years, your experience that you've seen. That's not the right word. Let's not be crude about this. There's been some difficult times, some challenging times, but across those periods, there's also been some really key successes. And Troy, I want you to share with the group some of the great examples that you have seen of allyship working really well, and explain why those have been such highlights for you.
Just trying to get the difficult parts out of my head for the moment, because sometimes they supersede the good. And I think one of the traits that all of us have to have is being able to speak about the good things that happen, because they give you joy, they make you feel warm. If we focused on the negative all the time, and some people say that I do, it brings you down. So just on Chris's point there, if you do stand up, if you are an expressive person in this space, make sure you've got a good support system around you as well. Yeah. Make sure there's good people around you where you can share not just the excitement, but maybe the fear as well. So can I be really selfish and speak about an event that I have the privilege of putting on? And the reason I want to speak about it is because it's so significant in this journey for so many women. So one of the early years at Kick It Out, I was tasked with producing a mentoring event. So let's say similar to this in regards to attendees, mentoring, trying to help people gain access into football. After the event, I wanted to know, because I can visibly see, but I wanted to know how many women were in the environment that were comfortable to be in a space that was dominated by men. And it was 9% of women that attended that event out of 250. And I asked around. Yeah, that's about right, Troy. But I didn't want this was 10 years ago, I didn't want that's just about right, because that means that we are then failing on one of our elements in regards to, supporting groups that have been underrepresented for far too long in our game. So I did a much smaller bespoke women's conference, 100 women in the environment. And a lot of that was just, one, to make them feel comfortable with the football speak, the football language, but two, to know that there are many, many great role models out there that they can aspire to be. So that actually when they came into the bigger conference, which now is growing into 300 plus, 400 plus people, that there wasn't a fear of being in that room, and they have just as much right to be there, to either be someone that's mentoring, or to be a support system, or just to glorify in the networking part of it, which is amazing. And to grow and develop who they are as individuals. And I'm opposite to David. I walk in here today, I'm all right. I'm absolutely all right. And I think anyone that knows me will know that. 10 years ago, maybe a little bit different, in regards to, the enormity of trying to give women a platform in football, when I know that the platform in football was very minute. But now, and I support women in football events for God knows how many years now, but it's always a positive, and it's always a nice feeling to be in the environment. So for me, that's one of the positive initiatives that I've helped develop, is to create a space where, again, I'll go back to that unique, that authentic, that women can excel in this game without fear and without judgment. Now, unfortunately, that judgment will always exist. It's still male-dominated. It doesn't matter if you're trying to work in the women's side of the game or the male side of the game. It's still male dominated. So as long as you can, be yourself, surround yourself with good people, be a part of the change that is happening, and hopefully it's not going to take the amount of years that I've heard, then for me, you're creating that footstep, like I've gone back to that footstep again, or your imprint in this game. So over the last few years, obviously we put, what was it called? COVID. That's that thing, wasn't it? It was COVID. We bring that into the equation, but I've seen so many, it'll be very hard to pluck one out, but as I look at some of the football club representatives that I've seen here, the reason they're here is because they're all doing great work back at their base, and they've come here not to get that work kind of stamped, but also to share with so many others about the journeys that they're providing and the space that they're providing. So one example, but a real kind of round of applause for everything that's going on. This network is amazing. I keep saying it, and I'll keep saying it because sometimes we don't hear it enough. This network, 2 days of a conference around women in sport, is unbelievable. So again, you've only got to see the growth of women in football. When I went to one of the first events, can't remember the place that it was in, but there was about 35 women in there and a couple of men sprinkled around as well. Now look at the growth where you have a packed out 2 days conference. I'm quite envious, I'm quite jealous, because if my event doesn't hit this mark, then yeah, I'm not going to be happy. But no, this is a pat on the back. What we've done in the past is a pat on the back, and the continued conversation in this space is a pat on the back.
Can I just jump in on a quick thing that Troy said there about how long things take? And then that's back to what you were saying about being deliberate. So you have to be deliberate about it, right? And a great example about this is, if you look at the UK Parliament, and we say that what we really want is we want to have 50-50 MPs, men and women. But you have to be deliberate about it. And actually, if every time an MP stood down, got kicked out, all the other things that happened, died, whatever, and you just said, right, we're just going to put a woman in there, you could end up with an equal parliament in 11 years. On the current trajectory, how long do you think it's going to take? No, not quite that long. It's going to take 85 years, but still, right? And then people go, yes, but it's a meritocracy. You've got to have the right person for the job. Are you telling me that there aren't 325 women in this country who are capable of being MPs? And so you could apply the same to your football workforce. You have to be deliberate. And if you're not deliberate and you do make some proper action, you stand in that solidarity to do that, it's going to take too long.
Yeah. I think what we need to be careful of, because something like that happens, Scottish national governing bodies of sport made a real effort a few years ago to say we want more women on boards, and they challenged all the national governing bodies to do that. And it was great. We got more women were in national governing body boards, which is in fact more role models. But what we weren't specific about is, do not just add another seat to the table. Do not add more seats to get more women on board. Because what we've seen is we had more women on boards, but their actual voice actually decreased in percentage, because national governing bodies just went, I'll just throw another seat at the end of the table. They didn't replace men with women. They just added another seat and added another row and just kind of bloated the board structure as it was. So it's really important, when as Chris said, we are very kind of direct, but we also have to be very specific about what that means and what that looks like, to make sure that we don't then just flood the market and actually decrease the percentage of all the voice. Because when those women then potentially progress into other things, do they then get replaced by a woman, or are they replaced by a man? And why are we just happy with just one? And that's why I don't particularly like quotas, because I think that just gives an easy out to say, oh, we need to get 20% or 50% of our board. That's great. We'll just throw people in. Are we getting the right people? Are we getting the right intersectionality? Are we getting this? Are we getting that? You're absolutely right. But the problem is that without something, we continue to be in this position and make arguments around a meritocracy. And we know that that's false, because that's not how that operates. And so you have to be deliberate about it. And I think the other thing that you end up with, and you've seen it, I guess, sorry to use politics as another example, is that you end up with women in those positions when everyone else has failed, and you're in a really difficult position.
So like, I'm not a fan, these are my views, no view of any person.
I just think this is Westminster. Scottish Parliament's actually fairly diverse. I think we are just about...
That's fair.
I think we are about 50,
That's fair.
50, yeah.
That's fair. But you know, Theresa May was put in an impossible position.
Yeah. And that's the thing,
I'm not a fan,
it's putting people in the positions and giving them the resources to succeed. Yeah. And that's a big thing as well. We tend to, is giving people that opportunity to succeed rather than just, there's a job. Yeah. Whether it's a football manager giving the resources to go and make the changes rather than 6 months they're out the door, whether it's somebody in the board who's been asked to change a failing company and actually giving them the kind of ability to change. And
make sure the culture's right, because I think that's the other thing when we're talking about anything, you know, in terms of any sort of, you know, in terms of intersectional identities, if you like, is like if you've got a culture, you know, if you're sort of saying, well, it's a great culture here, we don't ever have any grievances. Brilliant. Really? Shouldn't you be thinking about whether you solve grievances in an equitable way and in a way that you have people come away and go, oh, do you know what, we've dealt with that really well. That's what you should be measuring, not how many grievances you have, and that people feel like they can speak out, and all of those things. And again, you're talking about not just your leadership, you're talking about how you build a culture from the grassroots as well as from bottom up as well as top down in order to enable that.
And that's what it comes to. When I go and speak to clubs and they say, oh, we've not had any discrimination reports this last season. First thing you ask is, well, can I see where you're advertising the discrimination mechanism? Where is the kick it out phone number or app posted around the club? Where is this? Where is that? We all know what happens. And if a company or any a club says, oh no, our staff are all happy, the culture will, have you told them how to put a grievance? What's the safety mechanism? What's the whistleblowing policy in place?
Doing it safely.
And it comes really important around that. It's going deeper than just what the number potentially says.
It feels like there's a lot there to be said about education, about reflection on revisiting some of those topics. So, you know, you don't just qualify, get into your job and you feel settled that, you know, you can go off and do your role perfectly back to front, never retrain again or never get upskill or CPD. I think that's essential, and I think that's what I'm hearing from, you know, Troy, the example you gave there from the network, you know, let's say 10 years ago to where it is now. That doesn't just happen overnight. There's a long process that goes beyond that, and there's a lot of, I guess, teaching aspects to that, as well as individuals learning on their own behalf to make those changes, to know where to push and where to drive. And Chris, coming to you on this, obviously 25 years experience with leadership, change management in different organisations. What are you seeing that is some of the key trends now where we're talking about allyship? I think we're familiar with the terms. We're getting used to getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. But are leaders taking action, and are they taking change? And if so, have you got any examples that you can share?
I think it's a really good question, Jayna, actually, because I think, are we comfortable with being uncomfortable? I think we could talk about it really well, but you know, I'm in the throes of a piece of work at the moment with an organisation, and they're saying, look, I'm talking to, you know, one particular part of their business, and they're like, we talk a really good talk. Our leaders can go out there and say all the right things in this area, but when it comes to being in our business on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't play out in that way. So what do you do with that when someone thinks we've got it? We're saying all the right things, they're potentially advising people in that area. And so, you know, the thing that I'm trying to work with them on is, okay, so how do we take those leaders on a journey, because their intention is probably good, right? So how do you take those leaders on that journey where they do feel a bit uncomfortable? And that's the first thing that they have to do, is feel uncomfortable and feel all right with that. And that's hard. That is actually really hard. You know, I've been, you know, as I say, doing this work for like, you know, 20, 25 years. I first thought about, I used to run a business consultancy, and when the Equality Act came in 2010, which is a long time ago now, you know, I had to I thought really carefully about how we can build some kind of practice around that, because, you know, we knew that businesses would have to take on board this new piece of legislation. And at first it was just about compliance and stuff. So I've thought about it for a while. And, you know, and I've got a cultural studies degree, and I've done work on race and gender and, you know, queer theory for longer actually, but anyway, for a long time. And I still feel deeply uncomfortable when I get something wrong around something that's not in my identity. So if I get something wrong around race or I get something wrong around disability, and I do. And I've been thinking about this for 35 years and it feels horrible. And all you want to do is go and apologise to the person. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry if I did this thing. And actually, what am I doing? I started by saying, don't center yourself, don't make it about your identity. And that's exactly that point. It's like I'm making it about me. So you have to really sit with that discomfort. And that's really hard, particularly when you're a leader in a business. So that's the thing that I'm trying to kind of do this work with this organisation, is to say, how do we go on this journey of sitting with that discomfort a bit in a way that you've never had to do in your life, and particularly for, you know, leaders in businesses who are often straight, white, cisgendered men, often, not always, and that's not just about them, you know, find the same with some women leaders, you know, etc. Sit with that discomfort, learn something from it, and then think about how you're going to make your business better. And I think that's the thing, is like each business, you know, when I say I worked in a consultancy, it was a small sort of independent boutique. I haven't got like 4 whatevers to give you because I didn't work for McKinsey, so I haven't got like a thing. Sorry to anyone who works for McKinsey, worked in McKinsey. So I think it's really important for from each business perspective to really understand what's going on for them. But I think that discomfort piece is a really interesting one, and I don't think, you know, we could talk about it here, and even the people who talk about it, I don't think often really understand what that really means, you know, when you're doing it. So I think even that is interesting, that having those conversations now feels like something, we've been talking about it for ages amongst us, because we have been talking about it for ages. But I think you'll find there's plenty of organisations that are just at the beginning of this journey. So, you know, I've done work with organisations on allyship. I don't tell them what I told you at the beginning here, because they're at the beginning of a journey.
Yeah.
No, it's on you, go, Troy.
Are you going to disagree with me?
No, I've been itching, right, for quite a long while. I have a real problem with tokenism.
Yeah.
Tokenism comes from comfort.
Yeah.
Okay? So we talk about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. The comfortable element for many, and I'm talking about the game that I work in, provides then the tokenism that actually what is on the tin, what we're saying we're going to do, sometimes might not manifest itself, because actually we're not a believer of the change that we want to see. If we're going to be open, if we're going to be honest, if we're going to be, you know, talking in a space where actually we want people to understand the good, the bad, and the horrible, then we have to be open about that. And for me, tokenism exists quite a lot in the sport. It probably does in other sports. I don't really care, because I need to get my head around what we're doing in this sport, and I have to continue to get my head around what we're doing in this sport, because the dial changes quite a lot. And there's a particular kind of area where I think actually are our leaders, in a broad sense, actively looking for change, actively promoting opportunities in the right areas, actively employing the people and allowing them the skill that they brought them in for. Are they allowing them to adopt that skill within the environment that they're working in? So...
Great questions.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Sorry, I know I go off track sometimes, but for me, that I would repeat that today, I would repeat it tomorrow, and I would repeat it at the end of next week. Because if we just accept that people are uncomfortable and they need to get comfortable, there's a lot of people that are already comfortable. And for me, I was going to say it, but I was still talking, so I was going to say bless you. But for me, there's massive amount of change required, needed, but we also have to redress certain things as well that exist and have existed in our game for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it is that scaredness.
I'll give Troy a clap for that, to be fair.
You don't have to, no. Do it at the end.
It's that scared. Like, I go into clubs, you speak to leaders. I've seen it in Scotland, I've seen it across Europe, I've seen it in England, and people are scared of making a mistake, saying the wrong thing, doing it wrong, whatever it may be, that there is fear around this ED&I space.
Or they don't care.
Yeah.
And they wrap it up in fear. Sorry, it's true.
I didn't slap you. I'm trying to.
All right.
You, yeah.
And
I think you're absolutely right, David.
And it's important that we challenge, and that's for people like us. Yeah, I'm employed by the EFL, but I'm employed to try and make the game better, and that's going to need challenge and what we ask them to do, what we demand of them, putting things out there to be represented and reflective, because when we then look at their statistics, when the rest of the world looks at their statistics, we can basically say, well, we want you to be reflective. You're not. Get it fixed. And that's sometimes what we need to do. And a lot of it's what you said about taking people on that journey, about showing them the way, being an advocate. I'm not exactly somebody who's going to be the kind of the aggressor when it comes to these clubs, because we need to try and take them on a journey. We need to understand how they're feeling. But certainly it's trying to break down that fear barrier. You don't go on a roller coaster because you don't think it's going to be fun. You don't go on the roller coaster because you're scared. And it's this same thing with ED&I. They don't do it, not because they don't think it's right. I think most people in clubs are fundamentally good people, but we need to just break down a few barriers that they might have that allows them to go on the journey with us and help them on that path.
I think it's interesting, both Dave, yourself there, and Chris touched on starting from somewhere, and whether that's starting small, it's still starting from somewhere. And I think, you've heard from the panel, I told you it's going to be a tasty panel. You've heard from them talking about what allyship means and what allies are and how they identify an ally. What I want to ask the panel next is the question I want to pose to the audience first. So a bit of audience participation, please. Don't worry, you don't have to leave your chairs. But I'd just like to ask you all, and if you can raise hands, if you have had an ally who has played a role in your professional development to date. So raise your hand if you can think of someone who has helped you, they've shown allyship with you within your professional career today. I'm looking around the room, and panellists, please raise as well, because it's coming to you next. But that's a good 70% of the room, I would say, and I would definitely include myself in that. And that's really strong to see. Thank you for that. That's really important that we have those people, and some of us can reflect on who that is. And perhaps actually you're maybe sat here and you're that person for somebody else. But panellists, I want to start with you, Troy, around anyone who's played a big role for you and has really shown you that allyship to help you get to where you are.
It would be wrong of me to select just one. I've got multiple people who I've reached out to, who then have lived the journey with me. So I came into the industry wanting to make and affect change. So I've been in the industry for far too many years to mention, but in this type of environment where I've had this role, 12 years, honestly, I feel blessed for the people that have been part of my journey, that have understood me, that have helped me, that have created the new me when it needs to, that have also picked me up when I pick up the phone and just rant, who have been there to dust me down. I can't tell you the amount of people that, were new to me but are now friends in the game. I put myself out there. I don't deny myself going anywhere because I feel that it's important that I'm recognised and people understand that I'm there. Just being in a space tells people that I'm a supportive individual. But honestly, I particularly around this event today and the amount of connects and contacts, but then also the amount of friends that I have in here, it'd be wrong to pick out one. This person sitting out next to me, I'm not picking her out, but it's easy just to say because she's sitting next to me.
It's just stolen my answer. I was going to say him.
This wasn't rehearsed.
There's many in the room already. As I look around, I can see those in the room that are trying to wave at me to say, yes, Troy, remember when I supported you? But no, there are so many people in the room, but also there's so many people that are not here today that I know would want to be here today, and they are my support systems as well. So honestly, I couldn't say one person. I'm a very bubbly, nice guy. I can also be the other side, but honestly, this game, I wouldn't still be here if that support system was not here and available to me all the way through.
Thanks, Troy. Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a tough, obviously Troy Townsend, number one. It is a tough question, precisely for the reason that Troy's just set out there. And again, I think, you all put your hand up for that, most of you did. Would you have classified them as your allies, or would you have just sort of said it was like a really important, but you used the word support, I used the word collaborator earlier, co-conspirator, your kind of friends, kind of confidants, all of those things. So I think that's the thing for me is like, it's hard to pick one particular person. There's loads of them, but I would never think of them as allies, actually.
Yeah, well, that's the reason why I didn't put up my hand, because I don't see whether it's Monique, whether it's Yvonne Harrison, whether it's
name dropping.
Yeah, whether it's a family member, whether it's a colleague, whether it's somebody I class more as a mentor. It probably goes back to what I deem as being an ally is, or an ally is just somebody who is there, who's friendly, who's kind, who's thoughtful. I could pick up the phone to a number of people in the game asking for their advice on how do you think this should work, or I'm not from that particular characteristic, how does it feel now? Would I class them as an ally? Probably not. Would I class them as a confidant, a colleague, a friend? Yeah, I'd class them more as that. Again, that's maybe just down to what I regard as what an ally in the basic level is.
And Dave, just sticking with you then, in terms of the networks and I suppose inviting people to a space which they might not feel invited to, and we could use football as that space, for example, how do you go about creating that safe belonging to, one, I guess, support yourselves and your teams to meet the needs of those others who are underrepresented in the full game, but two, to Troy's point, not make it tokenistic?
I think it's, in some ways, for the clubs, and I think where we've been able to be quite successful getting the clubs to do what we were asking them to do is a bit of a safety net. Is I'm here as our clubs, come and ask me the stupid question. Don't do it out in the world. Kind of come and ask me if you've got a challenge of terminology of what you should be doing, or how does this work, or what is this, or what does this mean? Come and ask me, that I can then support the club, educate the club, take them into that environment where we can then make sure that they get things right when they do it. Because we all know, we've all seen it, we've all dealt with fantastic clubs who do a lot of good work. It takes one thing for them to get it wrong, for it to happen in the club, for the CEO or the chair or whatever it is to come out and say a bad piece of terminology, and then that club's mud. And they get stained of being this not inclusive club, when in the background we've seen all the good things they're doing and all the effort and all the commitment they make. So I think that's what we've been successful, so the clubs now have that bit of a safety net. Pick up the phone, drop me an email, whatever it is, and we can talk through the situation to help them get it right rather than them just verbally vomiting. It's
also protecting your environment, isn't it? So we talk about, making a mistake, language, whatever that can impact on everybody. But for me, education is a word that will get thrown about quite a lot. I, at my age, continually educate myself, making sure that I have the knowledge and the backing and the understanding. So when I go and deliver, I go and deliver with authority and understanding. And if I get something wrong, I own it as well, by the way, because none of us are 100% going to get everything right. So we own our space, as long as we're not outlandish, and we make sure that we, anything that is said that is untoward or maybe not the right language or terminology, we apologise and make sure we correct ourselves. Football has existed with that saying the wrong thing impacting on everybody. I've been caught out before by a situation that happened a few years ago when obviously the person that was the chair of this, the organisation that works there, using language and terminology on multiple occasions that was just not acceptable. And I call the organisation out alongside him because it seems like it's a culture that was allowed to flourish. And I think it's at those moments that sometimes we have to distance ourselves and say that's not necessarily the language of the organisation, it's the language of the individual within the organisation who then has to suffer the consequences. And those consequences now in this space are basically end of role, end of job. I've seen it 3 weeks ago, I've seen it 5 weeks ago. We still have people that feel that they can express themselves. Social media is the new world, isn't it? Well, it's not even the new world. It's a world that has existed for a very long time, and people can think, I can say it on here because it's okay. But that links to your job. That links to who you are. That links to the language that you use. And it's male, it's female, it's people who feel that they have an authority to speak in a way that actually could take them down, but also impacts on the organisation that they work for as well. So there has to be better work in this space. There has to be an acknowledgement of who we are and what status we have. So anyone going for a job in football and you're very creative on your social media accounts, let's say, that gets looked into, you know, and if that creativity lends itself to a particular characteristic in a not so good way, you'll find yourself not being employed and you'll wonder why I haven't been employed. So there's many factors involved in the kind of development of seeing people explore this space and hopefully get to the top of this space. And while we're talking specifically, obviously, about the lack of representation with women in football, I also must present because obviously everyone knows, what does Troy talk about the most? He talks about racism and discrimination and supporting people. We've got to take all women on this journey.
100%.
All women on this journey. 100%. Not just, and when I say selected few, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, by the way. It's just because while I'm up here, the sun is beating on the top of my head and I feel quite queasy, to be honest. But we must take all women on this journey. And I think that can be a real negative or a real massive positive, by the way.
And I think I'll be honest, I left. I was in quite a decent job at the Scottish FA. Been there for years, working in Scottish football. Obviously, it has its charms. Yeah, it's one of the 3 things I think about myself. But I left the Scottish FA because the EFL's slogan was "Together Against Discrimination." It was that ethos that everything is part of it. And we've obviously advanced that, and it's now just together, and we can use it in a number of different ways, use it positively, use it negatively. But that was one of the reasons why I moved, because at that point when I moved in 2021, we were coming off the back of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter kind of movement was really prominent, taking the knee was really prominent and what that meant. But for me, it was all just about, what about all the forms that we're dealing with? What about everybody that we have in an environment? And I felt if I wanted to work for an organisation, that when we talked about something and we stood up against something, that we had that authenticity, we had that credibility, because we constantly talk about it and we constantly have it in our DNA, that it's not about one particular area. And that became really important for me and why I decided to move.
It is important, but there are some, if you look at the Parker Review, for example, which came out a few days ago, they were talking about, now 97% of FTSE 350 businesses have got some kind of cultural and ethnic diversity on their board. It doesn't say what. But we also know that the same FTSE companies have got 40% women's representation. That to me says you've got to do more work on race and ethnicity. You do. And it's fine to say we take everything together, of course you do. And this isn't about trying to weigh one thing up against another, because you've got to do all of that work. But actually, you have to look at that evidence and go, right, we need to do more work on race and ethnicity. And guess what? You probably need to do more work in terms of race and ethnicity and women, to have more women of colour if we're talking about the football industry, 100%.
But that's when it comes down to your data. If you know what your underrepresentation looks like, and that's why, again, it was that representative and reflective. What are you as a club? What does your society and your demographic look like? That then tells you where your priorities lie.
I love data. Okay, well, I don't, but just for the purpose of this, I love data. But if we cannot shift underneath the data and find out the connect points of what it is that we're trying to achieve with the high data or the lack of data or whatever that may be, and data means absolutely nothing to me. And that's a personal view. So data is important, of course it is. But if we can't then dig beneath that, and I'm not saying that you don't, David, I'm generalising here if you don't mind, then there's the data that it has no relevance.
It tells you the starting off point. You then need to figure out...
You fill in the parts, don't you?
Yeah. You need to figure out, well, if we've got an underrepresentation of women, that the data tells us, but why?
Yeah.
Why? Is it because
Yeah.
the football club's not for them? Is it because the football club doesn't openly speak about them? Is it because they don't feel that they're welcome? You need to then understand what it just gives you the idea of, okay, 1, 2, 3 are priority groups. Let's go and find out.
Or as Simon Jordan told me last week, because
Don't quote Simon Jordan.
do I not? No, I'm going to quote him. It's because, you know, your lot don't.
Did he say your lot?
Your lot
Jesus.
don't apply or want to. It's almost like we're giving them a hand up. So this was around the underrepresentation in coaching. But absolutely, it was a bigger picture, it's a bigger story that he was talking about, with no knowledge and no understanding, and a very lack of appreciation of the battles that underrepresented people would have in his privileged position, and the fact that if we don't do something about that soon, we will lost another cohort, another generation of good people that don't see opportunity in the game. And if I'd spoken about the lack of representation of women at that moment, I think he would have blew a gasket.
Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing.
Of course.
It's really important because I'm listening. All these people I do count as friends, by the way, and they know that, and I would have told them that.
That's the one that hugged me earlier that I didn't understand.
But I think there's a really important point. No, I'm fine. Loud enough voice, as everyone always tells me. I think there's a really important point here. When you are an ally, or somebody's an allyship to you, there's a really extra piece that you need to put into the mix, and that's the emotional support that you give someone. I have to say, I found my journey on the board really lonely, and I've got Preeti now. It was great. I've got a wonderful group of people here sitting on my right. They're in the club that after, thinking about the same things I am. But you need travellers along the journey with you. I don't necessarily call them allies, but you need people who are after the same thing. It might not look the same for them, but you've got to feel like you're doing it with others, because it's exhausting and it depletes you. And the thing is, when you champion something and you champion it for other people, what happens is people take from that, and that's great, and you want them to take from that, because what you want to do is give them the platform to speak about something important, to try and do it their way, and you need to give them that soft landing, that psychological safety. I know that's the term of the year, the term of the last 2 years, in order to do that, but it is ever so true, because actually the support, emotional support you need to keep being an ally to others, to keep being an advocate, to be a support structure. Blimey, I go home and I'm exhausted. I don't want to be where others are, because actually I've made it my life's work to help others to be the best we can be, to be the beacon we can be. And honestly, sometimes I just want to get under a blanket.
But imagine if you're, but then at that point, you're absolutely right, Monique, because also you're on the flip side of that, because in the game, you're also those that are sort of historically marginalised. And so imagine if you are from the historically marginalised or the underrepresented group on top of that.
And you can, there's a reason why
Spot on.
I see Monica give her a cuddle, you see me and you give each other high fives. There's a kind of...
Well, it was a cuddle. It was a cuddle, really. Well, don't be shy in front of everyone.
Yep, sorry. And what I'm saying is that you can tell the people in an ED&I space are always quite kind of...
Sorry.
Nobody stops a Scotsman. But that kind of camaraderie between ED&I people is because we are on that journey together. We do constantly have the same struggles as we're trying to make the difference. We don't try and make the difference because, you know what, it's easy and it's an easy... We do it because we actually all care. And I think that term comes from...
Sorry, because that stop looked really big as well. What Monique has just said there, that emotional element, the element that we try not to openly discuss because of the impact it has on us. I'm going to sit here today and tell you I've had those moments with you. I've had those moments, those lonely moments by myself, when actually it's very hard to reach out to people because you're struggling. Football impacts on you in a way that I'm telling you now, I don't know if other sports do, but I don't know how you do it. So emotionally, I'm comfortable with breaking down in front of people now. Emotionally, I'm happy to share in this room that football has given me grey hairs. I did have hair, yeah. Emotionally, the game has led me to potentially want to walk away from it. And I'd probably regret it, but that's the stage and that wasn't too long ago. So actually, not just we'll continue the theme of allyship, but someone who actually can understand the emotional element as well. Monique, I really appreciate you bringing it up because it's massive.
Yeah.
It's absolutely massive.
Absolutely.
And I think everyone's contribution here on the panel, again, I think you've worn your hearts on your sleeve, and I think, you know, that emotional element to this. I know this room is a safe space, and I think everyone's taken a lot from what you have disclosed. I think it's brave and bold of you all to share some of those personal reflections as well. We have ran over time, but I think our main point today is that we don't want this conversation to stop. We want you to carry this on. And I will actually ask our panel to hang about the stage for another couple of minutes as people are moving on to get coffees and teas in the atrium in just a moment. We will hang about for any one-to-one questions because I know our panellists are here to hear from you. I'm sorry we didn't get to do that in the whole room. And thank you for the earlier contribution as well. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of